Wichita Liberty TV, featuring host Bob Weeks. Local politics without the spin. Interviews with nationally respected economists. Hear directly from Kansas conservatives about what matters to you. It's individual liberty, limited government, and free markets. Wichita Liberty TV.
Hello, I'm Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV, your weekly source for news, analysis, and commentary about Wichita and Kansas government and public affairs. We're broadcast on Great Plains Television, channel 26.1, also its companion website, kgpt26.com. Some of you may know me from my blog, that's The Voice for Liberty, at wichitaliberty.org. There the motto is individual liberty, limited government, free markets, and economic freedom in Wichita and Kansas. If you'd like to learn more about the issues covered today or to contact me, well, just visit wichitaliberty.org. You can subscribe to the email newsletter I send twice a week or so. You can like The Voice for Liberty on Facebook and follow me, Bob Weeks, on Twitter. Well, a proposal for a community improvement district in downtown Wichita includes a public hearing, but much information the public needs is missing. Well, this week, the Wichita City Council started the process of creating a community improvement district and other economic development incentives. The council accepted the petition of the property owners and set September 6th as the date for the public hearing. And this is for a new hotel in downtown Wichita. Also, on September 6, according to city documents, a develop agreement defining the city and developers' responsibilities will be presented to the city council. Well, a community improvement district, or CID as we call it, is a geographical district in which merchants add extra sales tax known as the CID tax. This extra tax is then routed back to the property owners. CIDs may be of two types. In one type, the original type, the city borrows money to give to the developers, and then the CID tax repays the bonds. In the second type, no money is borrowed. Instead, the CID tax is periodically remitted to the developers as it is collected. And the proposed CID in downtown Wichita is of the latter type. It is proposed that this hotel collect a CID tax of 1.5% for up to 10 years with a limit of $930,000. And at wichitaliberty.org you can find out more about how CIDs work, complete with charts. Now, city documents also state the developers will request industrial bond financing. In this case, according to city documents, the purpose of these IRBs is to avoid paying sales tax on property purchased during the renovation. Despite the use of the term bonds, the city is not lending anyone any money. Instead, the IRBs are a legal mechanism whereby the developers of this hotel can avoid paying sales tax on purchases made during the building of the hotel. Now, did you catch a contradiction here? The hotel developers are asking permission to charge their customers extra sales tax, which they get to keep effectively after the government withholds a small amount as a service charge. But they don't want to pay sales tax themselves. Well, the developers are also requesting use of the nearby state office building parking garage, but no details are given about this agreement. Well, the September 6th Wichita City Council meeting will include a public hearing regarding the CID, industrial revenue bonds, parking agreement, and development agreement. And as of right now, we have some information about the CID, but we have little or no information about the other items to be considered that day, which is billed as a public hearing. And I think if a public hearing is to include meaningful input from the public, the city needs to provide citizens with information about these items and do it soon. So I asked the city for this information. It's important we get it soon. For example, something like a parking agreement seems to be a routine item, something that could not generate much controversy. But not long ago, the city renovated a downtown parking garage and agreed to rent a large number of spaces to the company at the rate of $35 per month for each space. Now, in consultation with some commercial real estate experts, I did a little bit of math, and I found out that for what the city spent on each parking space, using current rates of return, the city should be getting at least $103 rental per space, but the city rents them for $35. So, will citizens get information about the industrial revenue bonds, development agreement, and parking agreement? Well, yes, we will. The city says it will provide that information on its usual schedule, which means we'll get it the Thursday or Friday before the Tuesday City Council meeting. That is not a lot of time, especially if citizens want to ask questions or perform any research before the meeting. And this same compressed schedule probably applies to City Council members, although I'm not certain in this case. We need to ask a question. What is the need for these economic development incentives? City documents give no reason. Now, some incentive programs require that the applicant demonstrate financial necessity. In other words, if the incentive is not granted, it is impossible to proceed with the project, hotel in this case. But no such argument has been advanced for this project. And if such an argument were to be made, we have to ask, why are incentives needed to develop in downtown Wichita? It's either one or the other. If the incentives are not needed to proceed with a hotel, then we are giving away a lot to its owners. And if the incentives are needed, we have to ask what is wrong with Wichita, that development cannot happen without incentives. Well, here's a window into how Wichita city leaders think. Since these incentives are for a hotel, they argue that the cost of the incentives, at least the CID tax, will be borne by visitors to Wichita. But this development, however, will contain a rooftop bar and ground floor commercial and retail space. To the extent that Wichitans patronize these business firms, well, they'll be paying the CID tax. Even considering only the hotel, there are many Wichita-based companies whose employees travel to Wichita and they stay in hotels at their company's expense. Therefore, these Wichita companies will be paying the CID tax in these cases. Oh, and they'll also be paying the tourism fee, even though their employees are not tourists. We really should not view visitors to Wichita as a cash cow. Visitors staying in this hotel will pay these taxes. There's the state of Kansas sales tax, 6.5%. Sedgwick County sales tax, 1%. Wichita hotel tax, 6%. City tourism fee, 2.75%. And then the CID tax, 1.5%. The total of these taxes is 17.75%. And yes, you heard that right. Wichita does charge visitors a tourism fee. And if Wichita voters had followed the recommendation of the city, its bureaucrats, and the political class, there would be yet another tax on top of this of 1%. And then finally, as with all community improvement districts, why don't the merchants simply raise their prices? Well, part of the answer is that the CID tax goes to benefit the landowners, which may not be the same party as the merchants who collect the tax. Other than that, it's convenient to have someone else to blame your higher prices on. In this case, Wichita's city government and its power to tax. That is a blemish on the reputation of our city. But there is some good news on the government spending front. Sedgwick County government trimmed spending on health. So what's happened so far? You may remember during last year's Sedgwick County budget hearings, there were warnings that trimming spending on public health would decimate the health department and its ability to provide services. But after 6 months, that really hasn't been the case. Here are some measures of services provided for the first 6 months of this year compared to the same period the year before. And the source of this data is the Sedgwick County Health Department, with my added calculation of the percentage change. And here are the figures. Immunizations given, up 13.5%. Health screenings performed, up 5.6%. Family planning, up 23%. Early detection works, up 7.5%. Sexually transmitted infection contact investigations are up 9.4%, and healthy babies activity up 11.3%. Now, not everything went up. Sexually transmitted infection tests performed were down 0.5%, and the Women, Infant, and Children program, or WIC, is down 11.4%. So for most of these categories of service, the amount provided has risen. In one case it fell slightly, and the exception is WIC, the Women, Infant, and Children's program, down 11.4%. But participation in this program has fallen in Sedgwick County every year since 2010, which is the same trend that we see across the nation. Now, you may be surprised to learn this. Spending was trimmed, but the service provided went up in most cases. That is good news, and as far as I know, no one has reported this. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. A Wichita business newspaper's editorial ignored the history of our local economy, even the history that it reported on its own pages. Well, of the several problems with the recent Wichita Business Journal editorial, the worst is the author's view that now, after the David Dennis and Carl Peter John election for Sedgwick County Commission, the Wichita area can return to making progress in economic growth. This editorial is full of phrases like good news for anyone in Wichita who values the city growth. And we once took pride in Wichita and in Kansas of our record of pragmatic, collaborative economic growth. Well, the problem is this is not truthful. Making such a claim ignores the evidence. Anyone who pays attention knows economic growth in Wichita area has lagged for a long time. Even the Wichita Metro Chamber of Commerce belatedly came to this conclusion. Even the Wichita Community Foundation realizes it, having just started a project titled The Chung Report, examining Wichita's economic downturn and how we can reverse it. None of this should be a secret to the editorial writers at the Wichita Business Journal. 2 years ago, it reported on and showed a chart from the Wichita Chamber that illustrated the slow job growth in the Wichita area. The Chamber was using that to campaign for a new sales tax in Wichita. So, why don't Wichita Business Journal editorial writers understand this, the history of the Wichita economy? Regardless of one's view of government's role in economic development, to write as though we've had much growth in Wichita is factually incorrect. It's not responsible. Well, did you know that you may have narrowly avoided being classified as a lawbreaker? Well, last week, the Wichita City Council considered making your house number illegal, even though those numbers may literally be set in stone. This would have been the case if the council had taken the action recommended by its Department of Public Works and Utilities. The current city code law, that is, requires address numbers on your house that are 3 inches high. The proposed ordinance the city was considering would require numbers 4 inches tall. And the penalty for noncompliance is $500 per day, with each day being a separate and distinct offense. Well, during discussion of this proposed law at the August 9th meeting of the Wichita City Council, it was mentioned by city officials that, well, we don't intend to fine anyone $500 per day. We're not going to go out and look for violations, the city engineer told the council. But, he said, we need the flexibility. And we see this often. Government passes laws with high fines and penalties, saying we don't think we're ever going to need these enforcement measures. But the fines and penalties are there, ready and waiting to be used at a bureaucrat's discretion. Fortunately, the Wichita City Council did not pass this ordinance. Action has been deferred to September 6. Well, here's a quiz for you. Cutting spending for higher education, holding K-12 public school spending steady, sweeping highway money to the general fund, reducing aid to local governments, spending down state reserves, and a huge projected budget gap. Who and when is this following newspaper report referencing? I'm using the word blank to hide the subject of this reporting. Here it goes. Under blank's budget for fiscal blank, public schools would continue to receive $3,863 per student in state funding, and higher education would lose only $5 million in general tax dollars, mostly in the Central Board of Regents office. But blank would take $165 million from highway projects and eliminate $86 million in aid to local governments, on top of the $95 million blank withheld from highway projects and $48 million blank kept from cities and counties. Blank also made a campaign promise to build all projects under the state's 10-year transportation program. Blank's proposals did not say how the Department of Transportation would deal with the loss of funds. Blank's budget would also allow the Kansas Highway Patrol to hire 70 new troopers, give state employees a 1.5% raise, and prevent the closings of 4 minimum security prison units and 2 inmate boot camps. Under Blank's proposals, total spending in fiscal blank would decrease $31 million or 0.4%. But that figure did not convey the seriousness of the state's budget programs, which some officials have said are the worst since the Great Depression. The gap between expected revenues and spending commitments during the next 18 months is more than $1 billion. Blank also proposed to help eliminate the gap by spending some $313 million, all but $500,000, that otherwise would be used and set aside as emergency cash reserves. Well, that's the end of this report. So let me review. Cutting spending for higher education, holding K-12 public school spending steady, sweeping highway money to the general fund, reducing aid to local governments, spending down state reserves, and a huge projected budget gap. Well, that sounds like what we hear about coverage of Governor Sam Brownback. But this isn't about him. This is coverage from John Hanna of the State address from Governor Kathleen Sebelius in 2003, where she revealed plans for the fiscal 2004 budget. Well, except one of the blanks refers to her predecessor, Governor Bill Graves. Now, our progressive Kansas news media criticized Governor Brownback daily for doing the same thing, yet praises Kathleen Sebelius as a voice of reason. Well, something else. You should know that your tax dollars are helping staff campaigns for political office. As reported by the Wichita Eagle, it is perfectly allowable for some Kansas state government employees to work on political campaigns. Not all Kansas state government employees can do this while being paid by taxpayers. Only personal staff members of elected officials can. But that can be a lot of people. The Eagle reports that Governor Sam Brownback has 21 personal staff members. And it's not only the governor that has taxpayer-paid employees on the campaign trail. The Eagle also reports that a member of Senate President Susan Weigel's campaign has been out on the Susan Weigel's office, has been on the campaign trail. These taxpayer-paid employees were working on political campaigns by walking door to door on behalf of a candidate. Now, the first question the taxpayers of Kansas ought to ask is this: if these taxpayer-paid staff members have time to work on political campaigns, well, who is doing the work of the people of Kansas in their absence? What tasks are put aside so that these staff members can work on political campaigns? The answer to this question, I'm afraid, is that there are too many staff members with too little work. And the second question we should ask is this: why is this practice allowed? Well, there is a ruling from the Ethics Commission that allows the use of personal staff in this way, which leads to this question: why hasn't the legislature passed a law to prohibit this practice? Well, the answer to that last question, I'm afraid, is that the ruling class protects its own. For example, there is an organization known as the National Republican Senatorial Committee. Its job is simply to re-elect Republican Senate incumbents. It doesn't say this, but that's what it does. And this is representative of the attitude of the political class. Once most office holders have been in office a few years, they comfortably transition to the political class. Thereafter, their most important job is their re-election campaign, followed closely by the campaigns of their cronies. This is why you see Governor Brownback and Senator Wagle lending taxpayer-funded staff to certain campaigns. Should the candidate be elected to the Kansas Senate, well, how can he not be grateful? So here's what we need to do. First, this process must stop. Even though it is allowable, it is not right. We need leaders that recognize this, and both Republicans and Democrats are guilty of this process. Second, Governor Brownback, Senator Wagle, and the candidates that use these staff workers, well, they need to reimburse Kansas taxpayers for the salaries of those staff for the time spent working on campaigns. Now, I don't want to blame the staff members because it's the bosses and the rule makers that are the problem. And some of you may be wondering, well, how is this different from the governor endorsing Senate candidates in 2012? And the answer is it's one matter for an office holder to endorse a candidate, and it's an entirely different matter to send taxpayer-paid staff to work on campaigns. I hope that didn't happen in 2012, but I imagine it did. Third, apologies to Kansas taxpayers are in order, as is a quick legislative fix, and a reduction in personal staff members, as obviously there are too many. And thanks to the Wichita Eagle's Brian Lowery for this reporting. You know, this use of taxpayer dollars to pay people to work on political campaigns is infuriating. Lily Tomlin once said, "No matter how cynical you become, it's never enough to keep up." And this episode shows leaders in Kansas government reinforcing the truth of Tomlin's observation. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. Well, one of the most misunderstood aspects of free markets is the nature of competition. A lot of people, I'm afraid, view economic competition as a zero-sum game, like a sporting event. There is a winner and there's a loser. But in a market economy, actors often find it valuable to cooperate with their competitors. This cooperation often happens without a government program. In fact, everywhere we look, we find that voluntary cooperation based on trust and reputation works better than government mandates. This is especially true in our modern world, which has more ways to manage trust and reputation through the internet. This is what makes systems like Airbnb possible. By managing trust and reputation, people will open their homes to total strangers and let them stay there. That's amazing. In this short video from Learn Liberty, Professor Ann Scoble explains more about these concepts.
I know how to get a free suit. All I have to do is go to Macy's, get a suit, charge it, and then when the bill comes, rip it up. Ethical issues aside, you see the main problem with this approach is that I can only do it once. The next time I go to Macy's, they'll know, because they made a note of it last time, that I rob suits, and they won't give me another one. But I have a clever idea. I'll go to Penny's and get a free suit there. But hang on. When I try to get my free suit from Penny's, they won't give me one either. Macy's has told them that I'm a suit thief. That's odd. One view of the marketplace is that it's a dog-eat-dog world of hostile competitors. The philosopher Thomas Hobbes saw the whole world that way. Since Macy's and Penny's are competitors, you might expect that Macy's would hope that I would rob Penny's next. That would even things out. But they don't. In fact, they share information about thieves. They've figured out that in the long run, it's in their mutual best interests to help each other crack down on theft. That's more important to them than short-term getting even. If they didn't share what they know, they'd be cut off from a tremendous information network about theft. So helping the other guy isn't contrary to their self-interest at all. Despite their being competitors, they have a strong incentive to be cooperative. Even more interesting is that they came up with this system on their own. It wasn't a grand design by enlightened rulers, a top-down plan. Rather, it was a bottom-up system that evolved organically by the merchants as they figured out how to manage their affairs. Long before the advent of the department store, merchants realized that cooperation among competitors was an absolute necessity. So many mechanisms in their world depend on trust and reputation issues. Not just in their world, though, in mine and yours. When I first told you my plan for getting a free suit, you might have objected that I ought to be afraid of being jailed, and that seems to require a government with a top-down plan. But even if the fear of jail were taken out of the equation, I would still have good reason to pay my bill. The same networks of trust and reputation that the merchants depend on are things that I depend on as well. To have a job, a home, a car, to be able to buy plane tickets or go to a restaurant. In an important way, we're all merchants. We all trade with each other. Not only are we capable of cooperating, we generally do. Society is full of these organic or spontaneous orders, everything from language to fashion, from internet memes to prices in a market. The basic concepts of Anglo-American common law, as well as the international merchant law, evolved in a similar fashion, the result of people's attempts to work out the most mutually beneficial ways of living and working together. So when people tell you that society can't solve its problems without force applied from the top down, you're right to be skeptical. Mechanisms that facilitate and are based on social cooperation are all around us.